It didn't happen all at once. No massive explosion, no one single event that blew my life to pieces. No, it was more like a slow leak in a tire you didn't notice until you're stranded on the side of the road. My name is Jeremy, and I'm 36 years old. I work as an engineer. I have, or had, a wife, Miranda, who's the kind of woman people notice when she walks into a room. Elegant, sharp as hell, and always the center of attention. She's got this natural charisma that makes people gravitate toward her. We've been married for 7 years. 7 damn years. And for the most part, I thought we were happy. Or at least I did. Then there's Garrett Holmes, my best friend of 15 years. Garrett's the guy who lights up a room without even trying. That reckless charmer everyone secretly envies. We've been through everything together. College, bad jobs, breakups, nights we can't remember, and the victories we'll never forget. And Miranda? Well, she and Garrett always got along a little too well for my liking. But I'd chalked it up to harmless chemistry. Nothing to stress over. Or so I thought. At first, it was small things. Miranda started staying out later than usual, brushing off my questions with excuses about work. New projects, Jeremy, she'd say, rolling her eyes like I was being paranoid. Interior design doesn't follow a 9 to 5 schedule. And yeah, I believed her. Why wouldn't I? I knew her job could be demanding, and I trusted her, or at least I wanted to trust her. But then came the endless texts, the constant phone notifications she'd never let me see. She used to leave her phone lying around without a care in the world. Now it was glued to her hand, always face down on the table. When I asked, she brushed me off again. It's just work stuff, babe, she said. You're being weird. And that was the first time I noticed it. That slight edge in her voice, as if my questions were more of a nuisance than genuine concern. It got worse from there. Miranda started dressing differently. Not just for work, but all the time. Tight dresses, red lipstick, the kind of outfits she hadn't worn in years. And then there were the late nights. She'd come home well past midnight, reeking of perfume that wasn't hers. When I'd ask where she'd been, she'd always have a convenient answer. Drinks with clients. Last-minute meetings. She made it all sound so reasonable, so normal. But the way she avoided my eyes when she said it, that wasn't normal. The night everything really started unraveling was at Garrett's place. He'd thrown one of his usual parties. Lots of booze, loud music, the whole deal. Miranda was in her element, laughing too loud, standing a little too close to Garrett. They exchanged these lingering looks, private jokes that left me feeling like the third wheel in my own marriage. At one point, someone, probably drunk, made a joke about how perfect Garrett and Miranda would look together. The room erupted in laughter, but I wasn't laughing. Miranda didn't even try to deny it. She just smirked and shrugged it off like it didn't matter. Maybe it was the way Garrett looked at her when she smiled, or maybe it was how her hand rested on his arm, just a little too long. Whatever it was, it hit me right in the gut. Something wasn't right. Fiona Hale, Garrett's wife, was there too. She's a beautiful woman, but cold, like she's always keeping something just out of reach. I've never seen her and Miranda get along. They're polite, sure, but there's always been this tension between them, like they're both competing in some silent war. Fiona didn't say much that night, but I caught her watching Miranda a few times, her jaw tight, her wine glass clutched a little too hard. She knew something too. Maybe not the details, but enough to be uncomfortable. A few weeks after the party, I had to leave town for a business trip. Just a couple of days. Nothing major. I kissed Miranda goodbye like I always did, trying not to notice how stiff she felt in my arms. Be safe, she said with that perfect smile. It almost felt real. On the second night of the trip, my phone buzzed in the middle of dinner with a colleague. It was a text from Miranda. That's what I thought, at least. But when I opened the message, my stomach dropped. It wasn't meant for me. There, staring back at me, was a photo of Miranda and Garrett, lying in bed together. A hotel room by the looks of it. Miranda was half-dressed, Garrett grinning like the bastard he is, his hand draped over her bare shoulder. The caption read, "Miss you already." I sat there, frozen, rereading the message over and over, hoping somehow my brain had scrambled it, that there was some logical explanation. But there wasn't. The message was meant for Garrett, and instead, it ended up in my hands. My heart pounded in my chest. my mind racing in 1,000 directions. How long had this been going on? How many times had they done this while I sat at home? Clueless and trusting like a goddamn idiot. I wanted to throw my phone across the room, to scream, to do something, anything, but all I could do was sit there, stunned into silence. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I excused myself from dinner, locked myself in my hotel room, and stared at that photo until my eyes burned. I wanted to call her, to confront her right then and there. But something stopped me. I realized I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken. Not yet. No, I wasn't going to explode. Not now. I was going to play it smart. If Miranda and Garrett thought they could outsmart me, they were in for a rude awakening. That night, lying alone in a cold hotel bed, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't just expose them. I'd make them feel every ounce of pain they'd inflicted on me. And then some. I couldn't get the photo out of my head. It was like it had been burned into my brain. Miranda and Garrett in that hotel room, tangled up together with smug smiles, as if they hadn't just destroyed everything I thought I knew. For hours, I sat there, scrolling through my phone, hoping it was a mistake. But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself otherwise, I knew the truth. They had been meeting behind my back, lying to me, making a fool out of me for God knows how long. Calling her, confronting her right then and there. That's what part of me wanted to do. I wanted to scream at her, throw her out, make Garrett eat his teeth. But what would that accomplish? A few minutes of satisfaction, maybe. Then what? They'd apologize, cry, make promises they had no intention of keeping, and move on with their lives. Meanwhile, I'd be the idiot left to pick up the pieces. No, that wasn't going to happen. If I was going to do this, I needed to do it right. I needed to hit them where it hurt. That night in the hotel room, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront them. Not yet. First, I needed proof. Real, undeniable proof. I couldn't rely on a single photo sent by mistake. If I wanted to tear them apart, I needed more. The next morning, I waited until Miranda was in the shower before grabbing her phone. My heart pounded in my chest as I unlocked it. She still hadn't changed her passcode. Stupid. Most of the messages between her and Garrett were gone. She wasn't dumb enough to leave a trail of texts lying around, but I found little things, missed calls, short conversations about meeting times, and a few messages that fell off. It wasn't enough to confront her, but it was enough to confirm what I already knew. They were careful, but not careful enough. I installed a tracking app on her phone. I know it sounds crazy, but desperate times call for desperate measures. I needed to know where she was going, who she was meeting, and when. If she thought she could sneak around, she was in for a surprise. I wasn't going to let this slide. I played it cool, pretending nothing had changed. I still kissed her goodbye in the mornings, still asked about her day, still smiled like everything was fine. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. Every time she touched me, it felt like a slap in the face, but I held it together. She didn't suspect a thing. Garrett, that smug bastard, didn't have a clue either. We still hung out, grabbed beers, talked about football like nothing had changed. I'd sit across from him, laughing at his stupid jokes, knowing full well he was screwing my wife behind my back. It took everything in me not to snap his neck right there. But I waited. I bided my time. They thought they were so clever, sneaking around like a couple of horny teenagers. But they didn't know I was watching. Every time Miranda slipped out late at night, I knew exactly where she was going. Every time Garrett canceled plans last minute, I knew who he was really meeting. I had them both right where I wanted them. Then there was Zoe Mason, one of Miranda's coworkers. She'd always been a little too friendly with me, always finding excuses to brush against me or drop compliments that felt just a little too personal. I didn't think much of it at first. I had enough on my plate without getting tangled up with someone like Zoe. But one night, after a work event, she cornered me. "Jeremy," she said, her voice low and sweet, "you deserve better than this." I raised an eyebrow, not sure what she meant. "I've seen how Miranda treats you," she continued, her hand lingering on my arm. "It's not right. And, well, people talk." I knew what she was getting at, but I wasn't ready to admit it out loud. "Talk about what?" I asked, playing dumb. She gave me a look that said everything without saying anything. "Just be careful," she whispered, her fingers brushing mine. "And if you ever need someone to talk to." I shrugged her off with a half smile. Zoe wasn't someone I wanted to get involved with. not with everything else going on. But her words stuck with me. Maybe I wasn't the only one who knew about Miranda and Garrett. Maybe everyone knew, but exposing them wasn't enough. I didn't just want them caught. I wanted them to feel what I felt. The betrayal, the rage, the emptiness. I wanted them to hurt. And that's when the idea hit me. Fiona, Garrett's wife. She was the key to everything. If Miranda and Garrett thought they could sneak around behind my back, they were in for a nasty surprise. Fiona was beautiful, in a cold, distant sort of way. She always seemed like she was half a step away from packing her bags and leaving Garrett for good. She wasn't the type to make friends easily, but I could tell she was lonely. Garrett treated her like an afterthought, the same way Miranda had started treating me. If anyone would understand what I was going through, it was Fiona, so I started spending more time with her. It was subtle at first, helping with little things, offering rides when Garrett wasn't around, making excuses to be near her. I was careful, playing the role of the concerned friend. It didn't take long before she started opening up. Garrett's always busy, she confessed one night over coffee. I don't even know if he notices when I'm around anymore. I nodded sympathetically, hiding the satisfaction creeping up my spine. This was going exactly the way I wanted it to. The more time I spent with Fiona, the more I realized how easy this was going to be. Garrett was too wrapped up in Miranda to notice what was happening right under his nose. And Miranda? She was too busy sneaking around to see the cracks forming in her perfect little world. The plan was simple. Get close to Fiona, close enough to make Garrett doubt everything. And when the time was right, I'd make sure Garrett found out. I'd leave just enough breadcrumbs for him to follow, just enough hints to make him wonder. I wanted him to feel that gnawing suspicion, that gut-wrenching fear that the person you love most is slipping away. And when he finally put the pieces together, when he realized what had been going on behind his back, it would destroy him. Getting close to Fiona wasn't hard. Garrett had taken her for granted for years, and it showed. She was starving for attention, real attention, and I was more than happy to give it to her. At first, it was innocent, little things. I'd swing by when Garrett was busy, which usually meant he was with Miranda, and offer to help Fiona out. Moving furniture, fixing a leaky faucet, or just keeping her company over a bottle of wine. We'd sit on her patio, talking about everything and nothing, and I'd watch her slowly relax, as if she hadn't had a real conversation in years. The tension between us was subtle at first, but it was there, undeniable and electric. I could see it in the way her eyes lingered a second too long, the way her hand would brush mine when she handed me a glass. And every time Garrett texted her to cancel plans, I could feel her disappointment, and I knew I was getting closer. One night, after a couple of glasses of wine, Fiona finally opened up. "It's like I don't even exist to him," she said, her voice low and bitter. "Garrett's always got something more important. Work, friends, other things." Her eyes flicked to me, and for a second, I thought she knew. But if she did, she didn't say it out loud. "I know the feeling," I muttered, swirling the wine in my glass. She looked at me, really looked at me, and something shifted between us. There was no going back after that. The first time it happened, it felt like stepping off a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating all at once. We were sitting on her couch, close but not touching, and then, without thinking, I leaned in. So did she. It was clumsy at first, almost hesitant, but once our lips touched, everything else melted away. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about Miranda or Garrett or the lies they'd been feeding me. I was just there with Fiona, and it felt right. It didn't take long for things to escalate. The second time was easier, more natural. We didn't even bother pretending anymore. Whenever Garrett was busy, I'd find my way to Fiona's place. We'd fall into bed, tangled up in sheets and each other. And for a little while, everything felt perfect. There was no guilt, no hesitation. Just us, filling the empty spaces Garrett and Miranda had left behind. But as satisfying as it was, there was still that gnawing sense of revenge in the back of my mind. I wasn't just doing this for pleasure. I was doing it to hurt them. To take away what mattered most to Garrett, just like he had taken Miranda from me. And every time Fiona kissed me, every time she whispered my name in the dark, I knew I was getting closer to the end game. Nick, my younger brother, started to notice the changes in me. He's always been sharp, never missing a thing. One night, over beers at my place, he gave me a look the kind of look that said he knew something was off. "You good, man?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. "You've been different lately." "I'm fine," I said a little too quickly. Nick raised an eyebrow, not buying it. "Look, I don't know what's going on, but if you need to talk." I waved him off. "I'm good." "Really?" He didn't push, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. I'd have to be careful. Nick was the last person I wanted involved in this mess. Fiona and I started planning our next move. Something big, something Garrett couldn't ignore. I knew I had to leave just enough evidence for him to find. Not too obvious, but enough to make him suspicious. A text here, a missed call there. Little things that would plant the seed of doubt in his mind. I wanted him to feel what I had felt. The gnawing uncertainty. The sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach every time his phone buzzed. I wanted him to know without a doubt that something was going on, but not be able to prove it. Not yet. One night, after Fiona fell asleep in my arms, I left a message on my phone, deliberate and incriminating. Something vague, just enough to hint at what we were doing. I knew Garrett would find it eventually. It was only a matter of time. When the storm finally hit, I wanted it to be perfect. I wanted Garrett to stumble across the truth piece by piece, until it hit him like a freight train. I wanted him to feel the betrayal crawl under his skin, slowly and painfully, until it consumed him whole. It happened sooner than I expected. Garrett found the message. I'd made sure to leave just enough breadcrumbs. Something vague, but damning enough to light a fire under his paranoia. I knew it was only a matter of time before he stumbled across it, but the timing still caught me off guard. I was sitting at home, nursing a beer, when my phone buzzed. It was Garrett. He didn't text, he called. That alone told me everything I needed to know. Jeremy. Garrett's voice was low, controlled, like he was holding back a tidal wave of rage. "What the hell is this?" I played dumb. "What are you talking about?" "Don't give me that," he barked. "I saw the messages, man. You and Fiona? What the fuck, Jeremy?" I let the silence hang between us, just long enough to make him squirm. "Yeah, Garrett, I guess now you know what it feels like." There was that sharp, stunned silence on the other end. The realization crashing over him that I wasn't just messing around. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a slip-up. It was real, and it was deliberate. "You son of a bitch," he growled. "You were supposed to be my friend." "Funny," I said, my voice cold and calm. "I thought the same thing about you." Within an hour, Garrett was pounding on my front door, wild-eyed and furious. I opened the door and stood there, arms crossed, letting him vent. He shoved me hard, but I didn't budge. I'd been waiting for this moment for weeks. His fists clenched at his sides, and for a second, I thought he was going to swing. Part of me hoped he would. But instead, he just stood there, breathing hard, his face twisted in anger and disbelief. "How long?" he demanded. "How long have you been screwing my wife?" I gave him a hard look. "How long have you been screwing mine?" Garrett's face went pale, and just like that, the fight drained out of him. He stumbled back a step, his hands falling to his sides. "You knew," he whispered, as if the idea was too much for him to process. "You knew all along?" "Oh yeah," I said, my voice dripping with bitterness. "I knew. I've known for weeks, Garrett. I saw the picture. You remember, right? The one from the hotel room. He looked like I'd punch him in the gut. Jesus Christ." Just then Miranda walked in, her keys jangling in her hand. She froze when she saw the two of us standing there, tension thick in the air. Her eyes darted between us, and I could see the panic setting in. She knew. She knew exactly what this was about. "Jeremy," she started, her voice trembling. "It's not what you think." "Don't," I snapped, cutting her off. "Don't even try. I know everything, Miranda. I saw the texts. I saw the picture." Her face crumbled, and she started to cry. "I didn't mean for it to happen." "Oh, save it," I shouted, the anger bubbling over. "You didn't mean for it to happen? How many times, Miranda? How many fucking times?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She knew there was nothing she could say that would make this better. Garrett shifted uncomfortably beside her, as if he wished he could disappear. Fiona showed up next, walking into the middle of the storm with eerie calm. She took one look at Garrett and Miranda, then turned to me with a tight, bitter smile. So, Fiona said quietly, it's all out in the open now. Garrett tried to speak, but Fiona cut him off with a glare that could have frozen hell. Don't. Just don't. Miranda turned to me, desperation in her eyes. Jeremy, please. I can explain. Explain what? I snapped. That you've been fucking my best friend behind my back? That every time you kissed me, you were thinking about him? Go ahead, Miranda. I'd love to hear you explain that. She broke down, sobbing, but I felt nothing. No pity, no sadness, just cold, empty rage. Garrett stood there like a man who had just realized he was drowning. And Fiona? She looked like someone who had been waiting for this moment for a long time. This is over, I said, my voice low and final. All of it, we're done. Miranda's sobs grew louder, but I turned my back on her. Garrett reached for Fiona, but she stepped away, disgust etched on her face. Don't even try, Fiona hissed. We're done, Garrett. You made your bed. Now lie in it. Garrett looked like he was about to argue, but Fiona's expression shut him down. I could see the realization dawning on him. He had lost everything. His wife, his best friend, his carefully crafted double life. It was all gone. You've got 5 minutes, I told Miranda, my voice cold. Pack your shit and get out. She looked at me, pleading, but I was done. There was nothing left to say. Nothing left to save. She gathered a few things, tears streaming down her face, and left without another word. Garrett followed her out, but not before shooting me one last bitter glance. I smiled. I'd won, or so I thought. After they left, Fiona sat down on my couch, looking exhausted. Well, she said, her voice flat. That was something. I nodded, suddenly feeling drained. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me hollow. I had done it. I had exposed them, wrecked their lives, taken my revenge. But instead of feeling triumphant, I just felt empty. Fiona stood up and grabbed her coat. I need some time, she said quietly. To think. This is a lot. I didn't argue. I knew she was right. She gave me a small, sad smile before walking out the door, leaving me alone in the silence. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty room around me. The house felt too quiet, too big. I had wanted revenge, and I got it. But as I sat there, listening to the ticking of the clock, I realized something I hadn't expected. The days after the explosion felt surreal, like I was drifting through someone else's life. Miranda was gone. I hadn't kicked her out officially, but after that night, she never came back to the house. I didn't call her, and she didn't reach out either. She stayed with friends for a few nights. Maybe Garrett, I didn't care. I didn't want to know. The only thing I knew for sure was that I was done. There was no going back from this. The first few mornings alone were strange. I'd wake up expecting to hear her footsteps on the hardwood or smell her perfume lingering in the air, but the house was dead silent. It's funny how you can spend years with someone and then, in the blink of an eye, they're just gone. It was like living in a ghost town. Every room a reminder of the life we built and the mess we left behind. Miranda sent me a text a few days later. Can we talk? Please. I stared at the message for a long time, wondering what there was left to say. But part of me wanted to hear it. I wanted to hear her grovel, to explain herself, to try and justify what she'd done, even if I knew it wouldn't change anything. I agreed to meet her at a cafe we used to go to back when things were good. She showed up late, looking like hell, her usual polished appearance crumbling at the edges. Her makeup was minimal, her eyes puffy, and for the first time in years, she looked vulnerable. But I didn't feel sorry for her. Jeremy, she began, her voice small, I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. Didn't mean for what? I asked coldly. For me to find out? Or for you to sleep with Garrett in the first place? She winced like I'd slapped her. It wasn't supposed to go this far. I was confused. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. So, what now? You think we can just sweep this under the rug and pretend it never happened? Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I thought she might start sobbing right there in the middle of the cafe. I love you, Jeremy, she whispered. I made a mistake, but I love you. Can we try to fix this? Please. I stared at her, feeling nothing but exhaustion. You think love is supposed to feel like this? Like betrayal? She had no answer for that. She just sat there, tears slipping down her cheeks, looking at me like I was the last thing tethering her to reality. But I wasn't her lifeline anymore. I was done being that. I want a divorce, I said, my voice steady. Her breath hitched, and for a second, I thought she might argue. But instead, she just nodded defeated. Okay, she whispered. If that's what you want. Garrett, from what I heard through mutual friends, wasn't doing much better. Fiona had left him the same night everything came to light, and he was spiraling, drinking too much, barely keeping it together at work. He tried to call me once, but I let it go to voicemail. I didn't care how sorry he was. Some betrayals are too deep to forgive. Miranda moved out a week later. She packed her things while I was at work, leaving behind only the furniture we'd bought together and a few random items that didn't matter to her. The house looked stripped bare without her, and standing there in the middle of it all, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. I hired a lawyer the next day. The divorce process was messy, as they always are. Miranda wanted to work things out amicably, but I wasn't interested in playing nice. I gave her what was fair, half of everything, but nothing more. She kept begging me to reconsider, to give us one last chance, but I shut her down every time. There was no room for second chances anymore. The worst part wasn't the legal stuff. It was the silence. Every night after work, I came home to an empty house, with nothing but the sound of my own footsteps echoing through the halls. The same house where we'd celebrated birthdays, fought over dumb things, and built a life together. Now just a shell, hollow and cold. Nick came by one night with a couple of beers, trying to lift my spirits. We sat on the porch, watching the streetlights flicker, talking about anything but Miranda. You know, Nick said after a long silence, you did the right thing, Joe. She didn't deserve you. I nodded, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like cutting off a part of myself just to stop the bleeding. A few weeks later, I got a call from Miranda's lawyer. She had officially filed the papers. I should have felt relieved, but all I felt was tired. 7 years of marriage, reduced to a stack of documents and a few signatures. It didn't seem real. The final nail in the coffin came when I saw her for the last time at the lawyer's office. She looked different, older somehow, like the weight of everything we'd been through had aged her overnight. Goodbye, Jeremy, she said quietly as we left the office, her voice barely above a whisper. I gave her a curt nod, not trusting myself to speak. I didn't look back as she walked away. And just like that, it was over. Our marriage, our life together, gone like it had never even happened. I went home that night, opened a bottle of whiskey, and sat on the porch until the sun came up. The divorce was supposed to be the end of the pain, but it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like limbo, like I was stuck in the space between what had been and what was supposed to come next. I thought revenge would make me feel better. I thought watching Garrett and Miranda's lives fall apart would give me closure. But instead, I just felt empty, like I'd burned everything down, only to be left standing in the ashes. Maybe that's what revenge really is. Not justice, not closure, just destruction, pure and simple. As I sat there, staring out into the quiet streets, I realized that the hardest part wasn't losing Miranda or Garrett. The hardest part was learning how to live with the aftermath. The dust had settled, but I was still standing in the ruins. Weeks bled into months, and the weight of everything began to crush down on me. The divorce, the betrayal, the revenge. At first, I told myself I was okay. I kept busy, worked late, hit the gym harder than ever, and drank more than I probably should have. But when the distractions wore off, the silence hit harder than anything. There were nights I'd wake up expecting to feel Miranda's body next to mine, only to be greeted by the cold emptiness of my bed. She was gone. Garrett was gone. And somehow, even after all the shit they pulled, it felt like I was the one left behind. Nick became the one constant in my life. He checked in every few days, made sure I wasn't drowning in the dark, place my mind kept trying to drag me into. One day at a time, he'd remind me over beers on my porch, like a mantra we both knew too well. It'll get better. I wasn't so sure. Miranda tried calling a couple of times after the papers were signed. I never answered. I'd blocked her on everything else, but part of me left the phone line open, like a final connection I couldn't quite cut. She left voicemails, always saying the same thing. How sorry she was, how she wished things were different. I delete them without listening all the way through. Sorry wasn't enough. It never would be. Garrett didn't even try to make amends. After Fiona left him, he fell off the map. I heard through a mutual friend that he moved to another city, started over somewhere new. Good for him. I hope he chokes on every reminder of what he lost. Fiona also left town. I didn't blame her. After everything blew up, there was nothing left for her here. The last conversation we had was brief. We met at a coffee shop one final time, but neither of us had much to say. She thanked me, whether for the revenge or just for being there, I don't know, and we parted ways. I haven't heard from her since. I stayed behind, in the house Miranda and I once shared, surrounded by the ghosts of what used to be. At first, I thought I could make a fresh start, turn the place into something that felt like mine. But no matter how many changes I made, the memories stayed. Every room held a piece of our past. Our arguments, our laughter, the way she used to curl up next to me on lazy Sunday mornings. I couldn't escape it, no matter how hard I tried. One night, I sat on the porch with Nick, a half-empty bottle of whiskey between us. The street was quiet, and the air smelled like rain. Do you ever wonder, I said, more to myself than to him, if we spend so much time trying to get even that we lose sight of what we really want? Nick gave me a long, thoughtful look. Yeah, he said finally. But what else can you do? You gotta survive somehow. That was the thing, though. I wasn't sure if I was surviving. I'd gotten my revenge, shattered their lives the way they shattered mine, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like holding onto a burning rope, painful and pointless. The truth is, revenge isn't the clean, cathartic thing you think it'll be. It doesn't fix anything. It just leaves you with a different kind of emptiness. You burn everything down, and when the fire dies out, all you're left with is ash. Miranda's betrayal broke me in ways I didn't know were possible, but what came after, what I did, changed me just as much. I thought I was taking control, punishing them for what they did. But in the end, I'd become just as lost as they were. A few weeks after that conversation with Nick, I decided it was time to move on. Really move on. I sold the house. It was a painful process, packing up my life and leaving behind the place where so many memories were made, but it had to be done. I knew I'd never find peace while I stayed trapped in that place. When the house finally sold, I stood in the empty living room one last time, letting the memories wash over me. Our first Christmas tree in the corner, the couch we used to cuddle on, the kitchen where we fought over stupid things like grocery lists and laundry. I let myself feel it all. Then, I walked out the door without looking back. I didn't have a grand plan for what came next. No big life makeover or dramatic move across the country. I just needed space to breathe, to think, to figure out who the hell I was without Miranda or Garrett defining my life. Some nights, I still find myself wondering if things could have gone differently. If I had confronted them sooner, if I had chosen forgiveness instead of revenge. But those thoughts don't linger long. What's done is done. There's no rewinding the clock. I started therapy a few months after the move. Nick suggested it, and for once I actually listened. It's not easy, sitting in a room, unpacking all the anger and hurt, but it's helping. Slowly. I haven't heard from Miranda in months, and I'm okay with that. Garrett is a distant memory, a chapter I've closed for good. Fiona, well, I hope she found whatever peace she was looking for. As for me, I'm still figuring it out, one day at a time. I guess if there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's that life doesn't come with neat endings. There are no perfect moments of closure, no satisfying resolutions. People hurt you, you hurt them back, and you do your best to keep going. That's all you can do. So, here I am, sitting in my new apartment, the sounds of the city drifting through the open window. It's not much, but it's mine. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I can breathe again. The anger is still there, buried deep, but it's quieter now. Some days, it feels like a scar, something that will always be there, but doesn't hurt the way it used to. And maybe that's the best I can hope for. I don't know where the road leads from here, but for the first time in a long time, I'm not looking back. I've made my peace with the past. Now it's time to figure out what comes next. And this time, I'll do it on my own terms.